Hi everybody! So it is 8 p.m. It's dark. What a perfect time to do a tag video. I found this tag, well, everybody's done this tag. This is the eyeshadow palette tag created by Samantha March and Allie Glines. And I thought, what a perfect tag for me to do, because the only thing I really care about is eyeshadow. Just like you'd assume by the name of the tag, this is going to be all about my eyeshadow palettes. I'll have the questions linked down below. I will also have Samantha March and Allie Glines channels linked down below. They created this tag. So yeah, you can follow along or do this tag if you want to. Alright, so there's not really much more introduction needed. Let's just go ahead and get started. First is show your newest palette, and that's gonna have to be the Nook Ink palette from ColourPop. I am in love with Animal Crossing New Horizons, as we all are. I actually wasn't considering even getting any of the Animal Crossing's makeup because, I don't know, none of it just seemed that interesting, but I got this because it ended up actually saving me like $9 on my order at Ulta, because Ulta can be that way sometimes. I'm really glad I have it. I love it, and it makes me want to get the purple one too. That's the Labelle one. ColourPop very rarely disappoints, and this even has a pressed glitter in it, but there's something about this pressed glitter that's different than others. It's smoother, it's not so chunky. Honestly, it feels more like an eyeshadow. I guess that's like all I really have to say about it. I love it, and I want to have more of these. I love ColourPop. Next, show your oldest palette. That's the Naked 3. This is so old. This particular one is from when this launched. It's so old. Honestly, I should probably get rid of it by now. I'm not gonna. The reason I have it and the reason I've held on to it so long is because it was a gift to me from my friend Sophia, and it was my very first more like prestige high-end product ever. And just those two things combined, this is a very sentimental item in my collection. My very first ever makeup tutorial was done using this palette. It has been taken down. You cannot find it anymore, but I still have it. Oh my god, that shade just fell out. So I think what I want to do is make a video at some point like following that tutorial with this palette. I think that'd be kind of fun. Next is show your most expensive palette. That's going to be the Melt Gemini. I don't really splurge on makeup very often. I tend to gravitate more toward like drugstore and indie brands. I think you'll come to realize that. I got this when it launched. I did not get this the first round, but I did get it on the first restock, and it was my first ever Melt product before they were ever even in Sephora, and I got it because I'm a Gemini. I love it. I don't use it as much as I actually want to, but every time I do use it, I'm in love with the look. It's just a very good palette. But yes, this is $58. It is highly unlikely that I will ever spend $58 on an eyeshadow palette like ever again. I just can't see myself spending money like that unless I find myself wealthy, but until that day, this will remain my most expensive product, I'm sure. Next is show your most affordable palette, and that is the e.l.f. Bite Size palette. I only have one. I know people like collect these. They are pretty good, but I don't know. I don't really like super small palettes, and I don't really like super huge palettes. I just don't really reach for like either of those sizes. I like a good like 9 pan or 12 pan. It gives me a really pretty look. This is the Rose Water. I like rosy neutrals. I love a good mauve. I love a good rose. It's a mindless palette, and it's pretty good quality, and it's $3 or $4. Show your everyday palette. So I went with the Blush Crush palette from ColourPop. It's hard for me to think about what an everyday palette would be for me because I use a new palette every day. Well, not new. I use a different palette every day. I try to challenge myself to use different palettes every day, different products every day. My idea of an everyday palette would be something that maybe is work appropriate, maybe like in a professional setting work appropriate, or something that you'd wear like to a casual family event. I don't know, just something like easy, neutral, kind of another mindless palette. So I went with a neutral rose toned palette. It was between this and the Going Coconuts palette because the Coconuts palette is completely neutral, but for me, I prefer to have just a little bit of color. I love a good neutral look every now and then. Today I have more of a neutral, like nude neutral look going on, but For an everyday palette, gonna go with this one. When I was working more of a corporate job, I did use this a lot because it gave me a really pretty, subtle, natural look, but with that little bit of color. So I do like this Blush Crush palette. Show your most colorful palette. I'm gonna go with the Sugar Pill Fun Size palette. I don't tend to collect rainbow palettes, especially large rainbow palettes with a lot of options, just because I feel like how many like Roy G. Biv colors do you need before you have like 5 of the same? I don't know, maybe that's just me. I just like different tones and different like color stories. I don't tend to like rainbow, but this one is like rainbow with a twist. It's kind of more pastel. There's some brights in there, some pastels in there. I love this palette. Anytime I think in my head, like I wake up and I want to do a colorful look, I reach for this first. And I almost always use this, maybe not exclusively, but I'll use 1 or 2 shades from this. There's not a single dud in here. They're all amazing, they're all great, and I'm gonna have to go with this as my most colorful. All right, next is show your smallest palette, and that's the e.l.f. Bite Size palette, but I do not have any repeats in here. So there's a couple prompts that actually, for me, would have been repeats. So I went with my next smallest palette, which is the KVD, I almost called it the KVD Beauty or whatever. Kat Von D. Kat Von D made this, but she's not around anymore. And I just kept this palette because I do actually like it. It's another neutral with a twist. It's probably hard to see on camera, but I actually have a rather large dip in this kind of like warm crease shade. I don't love this kind of sage shade in here. I find it to be a little patchy and not as green as I would like it to be, but I do like this shade here, and I don't know. This little palette has survived a few declutters that I've done. I do not support Kat Von D. This is one of the very, 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 very few products that I ever purchased from Kat Von D. So show your biggest palette. That is the James Charles palette. I fucking hate this. I don't hate the palette itself because when I use it, it's decent, but it's so fucking big that I don't ever use it. I've probably used it 2, maybe 3 times, no more than 3 times. It's too big. So I keep my palettes in a drawer, and I have so many that they do have to stack, which isn't usually a problem because I can pretty easily access everything, but this is just so big, it literally has to sit at the bottom. So when you stack palettes, they kind of like end up shuffling, you know what I mean? Like nothing ever really stays on the top or the bottom, at least the way that I use makeup. Things get moved around. This one never does. I will never pull this out. It's too big. I'm not gonna buy the small one because that would be so stupid. I might depot this though, because there are some shades in here that are duds. One of these blues down here, I gotta figure it out. I have to figure out which shades I actually like in here because I don't like probably like 20% of this palette, so I think I'm gonna end up depotting this. Next, show your palette with the best memory. So again, that would have been another repeat because the Naked 3, that's the only palette that I feel sentimental toward, and that's the only palette that I have like any memories of. I don't know. This one was really hard for me because, you know, nothing else has really been gifted, nothing has really been purchased like with someone. I don't remember what I've worn for special events. So I ended up just choosing the, I think it's called the Child palette, the Baby Yoda palette from ColourPop. The reason I chose this is not because of the palette itself, but just because of the fact that it's Baby Yoda. I watched season 1 of The Mandalorian. I started watching it with my family, with my dad. I ended up watching season 2 with Tony, so just that show and Baby Yoda in general is just a good memory. I bought this palette because of Baby Yoda, but honestly, like, the palette itself is amazing. They really honestly knocked it out of the park with this palette. It's so good. And he's so cute. I just love Baby Yoda, or Grogu. I guess that's like what his name is. He's Baby Yoda. Next, show a palette worth the hype. So I don't really have a ton of products that were like super hyped up. I don't know, maybe that's not necessarily true. It was really hard for me to like choose. I decided to go with the It's Frickin' Bats palette by Shroud Cosmetics and Butte Bean. I don't know exactly how hyped this palette was outside of like the YouTubers that I follow. Probably not a lot, But this palette single-handedly shut down Shroud Cosmetics operations. And yes, granted, Shroud Cosmetics was a one-woman show, very small indie brand, hand pressing everything. So it's not hard to shut that down, you know what I mean? But this palette did it. I think right now the shop is still closed while she works on getting out these orders for this palette. I feel lucky to have it. Some people are still waiting for theirs. I ordered this in October and I just got it a couple weeks ago. I purchased this alongside the Arcana, Creepy Cute, and Divinity palette, so I think I just got all their palettes. And the Shroud formula is impeccable, amazing. I haven't used every single one of all of the Shroud shades that I've like purchased yet, but I've used every single shade in this palette. I have not been disappointed with any of Shroud's formula. So I would say this specifically is worth the hype, but when Shroud opens back up their shop, they're just good. Their quality is just so good. Every interaction I've had with them in general has been just great, and they've been so transparent about like the status of everyone's order, and I just love Shroud. This whole video does not need to become like a Shroud dick sucking, but that's kind of what it's become. Shroud is worth the hype. I'm gonna move on. Next, show a palette not worth the hype. And I'm about to make some enemies, I think, because I don't think that Juvia's Place is worth the hype. So I only have two Juvia's palettes. I have the Magic, which is this one, which is specifically not worth the hype. And then I have the Warrior 2, which I think is pretty good, but it's matte neutrals. Like, you can't really fuck up a matte neutral palette. It's not that it's bad. I'm pretty thoughtful and careful when I purchase makeup, usually, so I don't usually buy things that are really hyped up that suck. Like, I try to get like a lot of different opinions. I try to swatch things when I can, and I thought I did everything right with this palette, and it seemed nice in person when I got it, and I never heard a bad thing about it, but I just don't like it. I don't know. Now I'm second guessing myself, because why does this work for everyone and not for me? I think maybe I got a dud, or maybe I'm not creative enough. I don't know what it is, but I just don't love this palette. Some of the shimmers are so good, like this Faso. Like this, that's Faso here. It's just so like dimensional and gorgeous. And then there's other ones that are just like I think the issue is that it's inconsistent. So where some of the shimmers are gorgeous, dimensional, impactful, great, others are just kind of like, they just fall flat. They're kind of shiny, I guess, but they're just, and I get it, different formulas, I get it. Sometimes people want more of like a shine. Sometimes people want, you know, something a lot more subtle. I just feel like it could have been amped up a little, and it's drugstore. It's very inexpensive, so I get it. I just feel like if it wasn't so hyped up, I feel like I wouldn't have the feelings that I do about it. I feel like I would just accept it for what it is, like I do with ColourPop. ColourPop is better than this though. I don't know. Maybe I need to use this more to really discover why people love it so much, but to me, it's just okay. I don't hate it, but I don't love it, and most people do. And it's a very hyped up product, and I feel like I'm over explaining myself because I don't want to get canceled, but that's it. It's okay. It's just okay. All right, next, show a favorite palette from a favorite brand. This one is so easy. I think Kaleidos easily has my favorite eyeshadow formula ever. So the issue that I had with like the Juvia's Place shimmers, for example, being like kind of disappointing and lackluster, Kaleidos is the complete opposite. Their shimmers are out of this world. So Kaleidos is in the middle. I have one Juvia's Place over here and the other is over here. You can't even see it. It's such a dud. But Kaleidos is just so, oh my God, so pretty. Kaleidos mattes are always smooth, blendable, pigmented, gorgeous. Like, I only have the 5, like the original 5 Futurism palettes. I'm totally behind. Like, once again, it's hard for me to spend money, but I would love like the full Kaleidos like collection, but I'm happy with just like the first 5. There's, oh my God, Kaleidos is so good. So my favorite palette from what I have from Kaleidos is the Futurism 3 Astro Pink. The color story is very versatile. You can create a wide variety of looks with this. The black in here is more of like that sequin formula. So it's a matte black with glitter instead of being more of like a shimmer. So I just use sequin shades as matte shades, and that works out just fine for me. So you can easily create like a smoky version of anything. You got some neutrals, you got some colors. This blue paired with this burgundy is not a color combination I would ever like actually think of, but putting it together in this palette is genius because putting these two shades together is like magic. And then finally, your most used palette. This prompt was honestly the hardest one to decide on a palette for, just because I don't really have like a singular palette that I use more than others, except for like when I just get a palette, I tend to use that like the most in that moment because I want to like use it more. But out of all of my palettes, there's not really one that has been used the most, if that makes sense. I went through and I tried to see like which palettes had more pan. I don't really hit pan on my palettes. I tried to see which palettes have more of like a dip in them. I ended up going with the Modern Renaissance, which makes sense because it's one of my oldest palettes and I still use it from time to time. If I feel like it, I'll use it. It's so easy to use. And there's pretty good dips in a few of these shades. Yeah, every single shade is used like a healthy amount. So I don't know if that's cheating just because I don't really use it that much, to be honest. I'll use it once every couple months, you know? But I don't know, just out of all of my palettes, this one has been used the most. It's a good palette. This is another one that was worth the hype. This is another really good everyday palette. There's just like honestly nothing wrong with the Modern Renaissance. Okay, so that was my palette tag. Once again, the questions will be listed down below. If you do want to do this tag, let me know. I love this tag and I would love to watch yours. All of my social media will also be linked down below. I'm very active on TikTok and Instagram, so if you're looking for more makeup content, that's a good place to look. I just want to say thanks so much for watching and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!